Okay, welcome to ELT Chautari Conversation Series. So today we have Bal Krishna Sharma. It's our pleasure to have him with us today. So Bal Krishna Sharma is an assistant professor at English department at University of Idaho, US. So welcome, Bal Krishna Sharma, sir.
Thank you, Jeevan, for the opportunity.
Let's be talking about your work and project. So, what are you doing presently? What are you busy at? Can you share something with us?
My job responsibility is like 50-50 for teaching and for research. And I told you I've been teaching 2 linguistics courses. And my research area focuses on sociolinguistics, primarily sociolinguistics of tourism. That's what we call in the field. And also social media language. And then I situate my scholarship within the field of applied linguistics and multilingualism. And literally and simply put, applied linguistics is the study and application of linguistic issues and theories to understand and also maybe solve some language-related problems in real life. That's my field, and I'm writing a couple of book chapters and I guess 2 articles for publication in various journals and edited book volumes.
Mm-hmm. That sounds pretty much. We're looking forward to reading them. So now moving forward, I would like to begin the conversation with talking a little bit about English language teaching scenario itself. So, like in conferences and also in research paper and also in academic conversation, right? So the global conversation in ELT has been very critical towards standard language, standard version of English. But on the other hand, the goal of English language teaching in non-English speaking countries to develop the proficiency in some sort of standard English. That can be British English or American English or Australian English or so on. So the question here is, have the critics been too idealistic about English language, or the practitioner or the educator are not aware of this conversation? What do you think about it?
I think it goes in both directions. You've raised an important issue, right? In the field of applied linguistics, there's an increased awareness that standard language is an ideology. It serves a very specific purpose of people who can use it, implement it, acquire it. And on the ground, people have been so much influenced by those standard language ideologies, language teachers and students. But there is one strand of applied linguistics, which is critical applied linguistics. And this critical has been also part of what you call the mainstream applied linguistic as well, that questions the socially constructed nature of standard language ideologies, and there is nothing as such which is a standard language. Nobody speaks that, and that's true, because whatever we conceive as received pronunciation in Britain or general English, general standard English in the US, it's an ideal construct. Nobody speaks this. People may speak a variety that's closer to what we identify as standard language in media or in academic settings, but in everyday conversations, people do not use this. Even the RP, received pronunciation variation, is also losing its ground in Britain. But the way we see the English language teaching and learning in our world, like in Nepal or in other parts of the world, this idea has been more, let's say, idealized or perceived as, okay, there is standard language and we should learn it and then be able to use it, but we'll not be able to use it in the future. And
Mhm.
We are talking now, you and me right now, and we're not using standard language,
That's right.
although we were supposed to be learning that variety, right?
Mhm.
So, and
So, at this point, my question is, what does this mean to practitioner?
well, I think you cannot get away with the ideology because it's so strongly rooted in the way teachers are prepared.
Mhm.
And you can see that people are critical about those ideologies, that, okay, there's nothing in SS, which is a standard language, but also not every teacher education program in the world actually teaches those critical ideas.
Mhm.
I've been to conferences where the presenters were actually endorsing, emphasizing, okay, there is standard language ideology and native speakers are the best teachers of the English language. People still believe that. So it's still there. So the lack of awareness is not only in one particular section of the society, but you can see that um, it's there everywhere. So what
Mhm.
was the second part of the question?
Yeah, I mean, like, ideally, so, the academia talks about there is no standard English, but in practice, like, non-English speaking country, they have set the goal, the goal of curriculum itself is to achieve that level of proficiency in standard English, right?
Uh-huh.
So at this point, so I mean, like, how should we move ahead?
Well, I think it's important that teachers be educated and trained in the realities of the social world, where we should know that language hierarchies and differences are socially made, and then when they don't work, we have to be able to unmake them. And if you want to make a person be able to communicate in the English language, and if you want to see the situation of the use of the global English or lingua franca, whatever you say, majority of the people are those people who are multilingual speakers of the English language, and for them, English could be a second, third, ninth language. So you should be able to communicate with the people who use language as multilingual speakers, not to the native speakers. So I think the reality of the social linguistic situation of the world should be something that the language teachers should be aware of. And I think a lot of curricula are lacking this, and we should move away from this. And then as we tease the language, learners should be exposed to different varieties of Englishes
That's
or
right.
languages.
Yeah, when we are talking about teachers, other thing, there is some sort of paradoxical practice going on. For example, even non-English speaking countries, when they're advertising for, teaching position, they have this particular criteria that calls for, native speaker of English, the contradiction, the paradox, what I see here is that so they are looking for a teacher to teach non-English speaking children, right? But they're looking for native speaker of English, right? So what do you think about this?
Well, I think it's a disaster. Like, you are giving primacy to certain racial or linguistic identities over the expertise of being able to use a language or being able to teach a language. And I don't think that is so strong in our part of the world, like in Nepal or India. Is very strong in some East Asian countries like Japan, South Korea, increasingly China these days, and Taiwan.
Yeah,
I teach these things in my social linguistic course. So I think even the native speakers of English are not too happy about that, because they don't want to be identified with their racial or native speaker
mhm,
identity. They want to be identified with their professional identity, trained, educated, and qualified teachers. So I mean, some people are maybe enjoying this privilege, because even if you have a degree in computer science or accounting, and because of the fact that you are a native speaker of the language, you are entitled to teach, or you are perceived as an expert of the field. So I think some people are taking that as a privilege and probably enjoying that. But eventually, the field is changing,
mhm.
but it's a very slow change, and the idea is so deep rooted in some parts of the society that I think is going to take time.
That's right. That's right. So I think we can sense that changes in some academic discourse also, and in some classroom practice also. For example, Ophelia Garcia. So in her talk, she said that there is no second language acquisition in traditional sense, right? When we are talking about teaching English to a speaker of other languages. So I mean, this point like there is no second language acquisition in traditional sense, but children are acquiring languages together in totality, right? So this is what she says. So, what does this mean to the field of SLA, and what are the future direction of SLA? Um, yeah,
I think the going back to the field of second language acquisition, historically speaking, we have this concept of interlanguage, right? You have this language one here, language two there. Your language one is the language that you speak, and you are proficient at that language, and another language two, which could be a target language, using the term, you are proximating toward that target, right? And anything that you develop in between is called an interlanguage, right? That has been the concept for a long time, like moving from one compartment to another compartment. I think the idea of seeing multiple languages is one system opens up the possibility for not seeing second language users and speakers and learners of English as deficient or they're competent. And their goal is not to be the native speakers of the language. Their goal is to be a proficient speaker in the given language. So there is no use of comparing the multilingual speakers of English with the monolingual speakers or the native speakers of that language. So when we say that there is no, let's say, second language, I think it also goes back to the idea of cognitive representation of one language or the other language in the human brain and mind. And traditionally, it was perceived that there are, different pockets for each language you learn. You have one pocket in your mind for your first language, there's another compartment, and there's a compartment, and then as a language teacher and as a language learner, you want to keep them separate, right? But for multilingual speakers, especially in our society in Nepal, does not work that way, because people grow up speaking multiple languages at the same time. And all these languages can be seen as different languages from the speaker's audience, but from the speaker's point of view, that's one system of repertoires. That's what we say it in sociolinguistics, right? This is a collection of multilingual, multimodal sort of resources or repertoires, and then there's just one system where everything can be drawn from. So we don't name it like a second or third language, but it's just a house, you could say, metaphorically speaking, where we draw whatever resources or repertoires or vocabulary we need without really consciously thinking about, okay, where does this word come from, which language? We don't really think that way. And if we watch a lot of bilingual people speaking, say in India or Nepal, in media, for example, they're constantly from a linguist point of view, switching back and forth between multiple languages. But from a speaker's point of view, there's no first, second, third, or fourth language. This is one system of repertoires. I think that's what we understand by this in the field of second language acquisition. And this very much makes sense when we see that's competent multilingual speakers of multiple languages.
yeah. I mean, like it pretty much values the linguistic repertoire of the speaker, right? So they have got multiple linguistic resources, and it's more like collaborating with multiple linguistic resources when they are trying to make trying to deliver some message or something like that. And they also talk about this trust languaging going across the languages, this kind of concept. So um when we are talking about language in totality and this trans-languaging sort of thing, so and we still have this SLA, and we still have course, it's named SLA and books with that one. So I mean, like with this new concepts or new way of putting things. So what should be the future direction, or where do you think SLA is going in near future? Can you share something about that?
I think this is one way. The radical approach is to see, there's nothing as second language acquisition or second language learner, but a repertoire of multilingual resources, you could say. So I think it's going to take some time to be part of the mainstream language teacher education and language learning, and not everybody agrees to this phenomenon or definition, because the way we understand multilingualism in the field of applied linguistics and second language acquisition has been very much influenced by this European tradition of seeing multiple languages. And if you think about Britain or any part of Europe, people learn one language and then another foreign language is part of the curriculum, and they learn another language, and it's very much structured, and languages are sort of associated with nation state identities, right? German language and Germany and so on. So, a lot of this multilingualism and its definition comes from those European nation state identity sort of correlationship between these seemingly two different domains, and then it has been very influential in the field of second language acquisition. And also, if you want to see in the US and the history of bilingual education, students, curricula, teachers were kept separate, right? Don't mix, don't switch. If you're speaking Spanish, speak Spanish. If you're speaking English, speak English. So keep them separate. So they're two separate languages. I mean, historically speaking, I think our field, applied linguistics and second language acquisition, they've been very much shaped by the people who have worked in these areas.
That's right.
And there is a sort of conceptualization of understanding what SLA is, but when you think about the language testing or assessment context, then you are being tested based on how well you perform in a given language, rather than how well you were able to code switch, or code mix, or translanguage, whatever you call the practices. So the testing practices have to change too, so that your translingual code switching skills, competence, or performance can be tested, evaluated, and treated very fairly. So it has not happened. Conversations are happening, but they're at the theoretical sort of applied linguistics level, not at the language testing or in the classroom setting. So I think it's going to take time, and it's challenging as well.
That's right. There's a whole lot of conversation we can make about language testing. We'll come back to that later. And also maybe our audience may be wondering, so if not SLA, so what is the appropriate terminology for that? So do you think we have such terminologies, or do you propose anything about that?
No, I don't want to propose, because that's not my primary field. I want to update myself, and then instead of saying English language learners, people are saying immersion bilinguals, and instead of like second language user, people want to use multilingual speaker, something like that. More positive meanings of the terms that we use, and I think we want to go in that direction.
That's right. That's right. So let's talk a little bit about that. I want to bring the context of Nepal now. So looking at the history of English language teaching in Nepal, so it's been something like 50 years. May not be like when public were given more access to English language teaching. So if we see that way, so we haven't had long history of English language teaching in Nepal. So during this time, what do you think Nepal has gained from English language teaching, and what has Nepal forgotten in this race of language teaching?
Okay. Well, it's an important and a big question. If you want to think about what we've gained, I think one of the points to consider is, let's say, a lot of people have access to the English language, right? If you want to compare the situation today with the situation some 30, 40 years ago, only a handful of people could access education that was in the English language or good quality sort of language classes. It was very much confined to elites or people who could pay quite a lot of money. Think about some elite schools like St. Xavier's, and then before that Darbar High School, and then another Ratu Bangla, and other sort of very few elite schools. But if you want to see today, you have all types of schools, and then even the ordinary people have access to the English language, and then you can see that people have been very much fluent, bilingual, multilingual in English, Nepali, and another native language. So I think there's something I would say is in a positive direction. And then in the past, I taught in a private school, and all the books we had were written by foreigners. And then there were some written by Indian writers. Otherwise, books were imported from outside South Asia, from the UK or other parts of the world. And we have now books in public and private schools written by local authors.
We have our own authors, right? Yeah,
absolutely. And we don't have to hire consultants from outside the country. We can, of course, but we produced teacher trainers and researchers, trainers of trainers, and all that within the country. So I think we are growing, and then English has been within the scope of many people. But at the same time, I think what we've lost, or let's say not made much progress, are a couple of things, right? You know, a lot of people have said about this, and then it comes sort of a common sense that unfortunately English has been compared with quality education. Education and English are two separate things, right? So if you can speak English well in most cases, then you are perceived as a competent person, an expert. And think about a lot of discourses outside the educational context, like this beauty pageants like Miss Nepal. Think about those contexts, even the political interview. And then look at how Kamal Thapa spoke English at an international meeting, and also Matrika Adav spoke English in a meeting with a foreigner. So if you want to see the social media comments that people have in response to these two types of Englishes, you can see a vast difference how people compare the politician's competence in English with his competence and success in politics. Kamal Thapa probably comes from a very elite class. He went to a good school probably. His background is manifest in the way he speaks the English language. And Matrika Adav, on the other hand, has a very different sort of background. And that is also manifest in his English language performance. So what I'm trying to say is, going back, how people are nowadays equating or correlating English competence with other identities, your quality, your success, your expertise. This is very, very unfortunate. And also more recently, the shift of public schools toward English medium instruction is a disaster, because I think there's a one question bank or a question paper being circulated in social media these days. If you have seen, and social studies and
social studies translated into English, and
that's
a lot of discourse is going on.
That's a representative case of what's happening in the country, right? Teachers are not trained. Students do not have a foundational proficiency in the English language, but the lessons are being or supposed to be being delivered in the English language. And I think that it should stop. And there's a difference. Let's keep two things separate. One is teaching the English language in a pedagogically rewarding manner, the English subject, the English language, that's one thing. And another is teaching a content subject like social studies or science or anything in the English language. These are two different things, right? We should teach English in a very pedagogically rewarding manner, and we should have innovative curricula, textbooks, pedagogical techniques to teach the English language. And we should do that. We should promote that. We should make our students competent in the English language. But at the expense of the language in these content areas, like the social study course, we should not be penalizing the students. We should teach content in the language that the students and the teachers understand. So I think we should go to that direction. And of course, there are other contexts where English is creating more divisions in society, although people have access to the English language. You can see the type and quality of English they get depends on how much they can pay. You have all different types of private schools these days. The more money you have, you can send your kid to a better school. The less amount of money you have, you still want to send your kid to a private school, but these are some low quality schools where you pump a lot of money that you earn from your hard work and spend that, and you are doing all that sacrifice in the name of the English language. And so again, that's a disaster as well.
That's right. So when you talk about you brought the context of the question paper itself. So I was thinking about that too. For example, like there's a lot of blaming game going on, right, in the media at the moment. So I mean, the teacher is kind of harassed, and the school is kind of harassed for that reason. I mean, like the way the example that you were giving about politician, and now this is about teacher, right? So it is because the teacher was never taught, they were never taught in English language, and they are now all of a sudden compelled to do all this kind of thing in new language, and that's what is represented there. So I mean, just let's forget about blaming each other. So putting all this blame in one place. So thinking about the bilingual question and also English medium instruction going on in school, what does this mean to us moving forward, right?
Yeah, well, I think this is a very clear and a representative picture of what we should not have done, and we should stop there. So this disaster has been experienced in many other contexts as well. And if you think about Rwanda had is a former French colony. French was the official language, and then because of the power and influence of the English language, they suddenly moved to the English medium instruction like this in 2006. And what happened was, because teachers were not prepared, there were no textbooks and curricula, there was low achievement, and education became a sort of a failure. So, I mean, we can see lessons from other parts of the world as well, and we don't have to learn by mistakes from our own acts. We can learn from
That would be really nice.
Well,
that would be really nice.
Yeah. There's no need to experiment when something is not working. So I think we should move away from blame game, because it's not about whether we should blame the teacher or the school or the municipality or whatever it is, but that's a fact. And that's a reality. And this is just one tip of really huge chunk of iceberg.
That's right. Yeah, there's a whole lot of things we can talk about English medium of instruction. So we'll cover that in other conversations. So at the moment, I was also thinking about, like you mentioned, a couple of things that Nepali speakers, Nepali learners, Nepali as a whole, again from English language, and also like thinking about Nepal as a multilingual country, right? So, what do you see the role of English in multilingual context? People also all the time talk about dominant language are, in a way, they are, displacing other local languages and all this kind of thing. So what do you see? What should be the role of English in multilingual contexts like Nepal? Right? We cannot ignore the fact that, okay, we need English, right? We need to learn English language, but also, yeah, what would be the better way to balance the act of learning English and also also promoting and also preserving our local languages?
I think that's an important question too. There is a traditional distinction in bilingualism between subtractive bilingualism and additive bilingualism. The former subtractive bilingualism means when you learn another language, a second language, you gradually leave your first language behind. And when you become a very fluent speaker of the second language, then you forget almost everything. And then that's called language attrition or whatever you call it, then you become a monolingual eventually. So that's subtractive, right? You keep reducing the amount and frequency and the proficiency in the language that you used to speak. And the another term is additive, means add, you keep on adding. So I think the role of language in our context should be additive multilingualism rather than subtractive multilingualism. And when you were saying, I think a lot of linguists are also saying English is displacing sort of local language, killing local languages. I'm not in a very radical position to say this yet, because it's the Nepali language in the country that is actually replacing local indigenous languages. Because if you want to see something called a language shift in sociolinguistics, right? When people have one language of communication at home with parents and grandparents, among peers and community. And when you move to another language for that everyday purpose, then there is a language shift happening. And when you want to see the language shift situation in the country, the language shift has happened from a local language to the Nepali language. You go to Chitwan, a lot of Tharo kids speak Nepali at home with their parents, with their peers in the community, and they've stopped or minimized, let's say, speaking the Tharo language, depending on where they live. If they are in an urban area, they've stopped speaking. If they're in the rural village, they keep speaking, but the amount has gone down. And if you think of a situation in other parts of the world where there are internal migration of people, right? So it's the Nepali language that's actually killing, but we also want to see a larger context, right? A lot of people in the rural areas who have money have also migrated to urban areas for English medium education, right? And then English is playing a role too. Nobody speaks among this population, presumably, English is the first language, or none of them are monolingual English speakers. But English is also playing a role there. So I think we should find a space, and this should be one for all the languages, at least something like a trilingual policy, right? You want to keep your local language. Is a language of intimacy, affect, emotion among your family, grandparents, and also the more powerful language of the country. Like the Nepali language is a language of society and media, because you want to be able to read a newspaper or watch TV, right? Majority of the programs are in the Nepali language, and then also you want to increase and enhance your potential for global mobility. You don't know where you end up working or studying in the future. So you want to develop your skills and competence in the English language. So that's an ideal situation, but a lot of what we call political economy in sociolinguistics, language has power, and the power doesn't come from the number of speakers, like how many speakers speak the language. That has little to do with the power of the language. The language ultimately has power in the economic power of the language as well. So whether you can find a job, whether you can travel the world, whether you can get other types of capital, like cultural, social capital. So English has been so powerful these days. So if the local indigenous language is not given space, and you could say in media, for example, if you don't find a job by speaking the Limbu language, then you start perceiving, well, my native language, Limbu, has no space in media. So, well, it's important to speak in the family, but if I don't find a job, so why should I worry about learning and relearning it when I'm in Kathmandu, for example? So I think this is self-imposed sort of constraint is also helping people to devalue their own language and identities. But I don't want to blame any, let's say, minoritized speakers, because we make sometimes a distinction between structure and agency. Structure are those bigger forces, and then you don't have control over those forces, like language policy, migration, globalization, economy. They are so powerful that you can do very little to change them. And agency is your individual power too. So even if you have that agency, like you want to fight against those, the structures are so powerful, and it's just hard to change. And sometimes you just forget that you want to change because you want to see your benefit, and where you want to see in the next 10-20 years is more important than what your heritage or native language is. I think unfortunately language has been associated with economy and power these days rather than a tool of communication.
That's right. You rightly said that. It's not only English language. I think Nepali language is also Nepali language also has played a big role to kind of displace other languages from academic setting and all. And that's another thing to really think about. So overall, I mean, dominant languages that can be local dominant language or international dominant language. So they are this is kind of scenario. This is kind of effect that we are experiencing or we are observing. Like let me share your context of I was doing in the process of doing my research. I just interviewed two parents. I just would like to talk about two parents at the moment. So I was also concerned about, like, when I was talking with a school, teachers and school management committee, principal, behind, sifting the medium of instruction, they would often say that it is the demand of parents, right? So I was interested to learn about what the parents were thinking about. And when I asked parents, like, there was a teacher from Newari language background, and then her daughter was studying in grade 3 at that time, and I asked her that if if she could speak in Newari language, if she has been taught to speak in Newari language, and the teacher said that she's the teacher, right? So she was the teacher of not other subject, not the language subject, and then she said that they don't teach her Newari language with the fear that the Newari language and the tone would, influence her in Nepali language and ultimately in English language. And because they just wanted to avoid that, and they were not teaching the kids Newari language. This is one example. Another is, like, I was interviewing our parents from Himalaya region. So there were a particular group of people, Magar people and Magar family, and I asked them, like, if school would have the provision of teaching Magar language in school, would you teach your kids Magar language? So when I asked them that, and they said that they would not teach, they would not send the kids for that. And again, their response was something like you said, they do not see any value, I mean, the economical value, the commodity value in their language. And these are two scenarios, right? So I mean, like, as a linguist, I'm also someone who study and worry about language. What does this mean? Where are we heading, right? So, I mean, eventually, after 1 or 2 generations, like, we are having pride of saying that Nepal is a multilingual country, but don't you think that we are heading towards in some dark future? What do you think about it?
Yeah, I think that's a very important question. Again, I think Nepal will still be a multilingual country because there are, like, depending on the data where you take from, there are 120 or 25 plus languages, and we'll lose many languages, especially those languages that do not have written conventions, they do not have a written body of literature and art, and not a large amount of number of speakers. We'll be losing them, but we'll still be able to have many of them. But that's not like how many, that's not a bigger question. I think those people like you and me who are in a very privileged position to be able to use our native language as the official or the dominant language of the country. And then I never had the opportunity to feel or to at least see how it feels to be a minority language speaker in the country. And unfortunately, those people who have enjoyed privilege are in the powerful position in politics, in planning and policy making. And unless people actually are educated and realize what it means to die a language, then it's just hard to change the situation, because local people are also feeling or encountering, you could say, tensions or conflict. They have this desire and love toward their language, but also a stronger desire is to raise their kids unlike the way their parents were raised, right? They don't want their kids to be like them. It's okay for this to be monolingual English speakers because they've seen or heard the benefits of being able to speak language fluently, the English language, right? So I think that people have encountered those tensions, and also there's one group of people, लोकल मान्छेले आफ्नो ल्याङ्ग्वेज आफैले पढाउन मान्दैन, आफ्नो छोराछोरी आफैले स्कुल पठाउन मान्दैन, अब अरूले गरेर हुन्छ. I think people say this, and in an extent that's true, but we have to step back and then think and pause for a while, and then where is this coming from? And something I mentioned earlier was the structure, right? The social structure, the policy, the politics, the economy, that's shaping the mindset of everyone, including the people who speak the endangered language, the minority language. I think the planning and education should be able to, or that's the point of intervention rather than just blaming people.
That's right. त्यही हुँदा हुँदै नि सर, जस्तो त्यो भाषालाई म्यानेज गर्न सकिन्थ्यो होला हामीले, हैन? त्यो पेरेन्ट्सलाई चाहिँ कसले त्यो त्यस्तो अवस्थामा त्यो सोच्न बाध्य गराउने, कसले त्यो अवस्थामा पुर्यायो होला? अनि त्यसमा जस्तो इंग्लिश जस्तो एउटा चाहिँ ग्लोबल कमोडिफाइड ल्याङ्ग्वेज भन्छौँ नि हामी, त्यसको पनि भूमिका होला केही न केही. त्यो अवस्थामा कसले पुर्यायो होला? अझै पनि चाहिँ केही गर्न सकिन्थ्यो कि हैन सर? Policy levelबाट अथवा I don't know, it's from the level of school, or कि यो अवस्था यस्तै हो, अब यसरी नै evolution of languages जस्तो हुँदै अगाडि बढेको हो कि केही गर्न सकिँदैन कि भन्ने.
A lot of factors are at play. I think teachers can do small things but important things, and there is a tendency. Think about a situation. I'll give you a hypothetical situation, like children who speak the Nepali language or the English language in an unfamiliar accent are mocked, ridiculed, and harassed. So that's the classroom situation. Language policy has nothing to do with that, or the president or the prime minister has nothing to do with that, right? The peers, the classmates, the teacher has to make the environment very favorable for learning. Right, when I had an MA class, we had one teacher, a linguistic teacher from Terai, and then when he used to say speech community, he used to say us speech community, and many students would make fun of him because he was speaking the English language in an unfamiliar accent, right? And a lot of people say a speech community instead of a speech community. And if you want to take a standard language ideology perspective, both of them are wrong, right? Neither is speech or a speech. You say speech because you did not insert a vowel before a consonant in the beginning, right? This language mocking or language ridiculing or harassment is not only other imposed, it goes to the extent that is self-imposed. So in a small things matter in a classroom. If you want to help students and then welcome diversities in the languages they use, not just the accent, that was the example, right? So teachers can do a lot as well.
That's right. All right, so I mean, we could go on and on about this conversation, so we have to think about time also. So I think this is not the end of the conversation, but we call this a beginning of conversation. So we encourage our audience to share their question, comment, and also, keep the discourse going on these topics. And thank you, Bal Krishna Sharma, sir, for your valuable thoughts and time. So with this, we wrap up the conversation for today. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me and giving me the opportunity for the conversation. I enjoyed it.
Thank you, sir.